Thank you so much, Ms. Jolly Mugisha, our Vice President, Western Region National Unity Platform, representing the Secretariat today. Thank you. Our next speaker is a friend of Uganda, Mr. Eric Chinje. He's the CEO of Africa Media Initiative and has been a driving force behind media development initiatives. His extensive experience includes senior advisory roles at KRL International. We'll talk about that. He ran our strategic communications at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, providing him with unique perspective for our discussions. Mr. Chinje spent over 16 years at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where he served as the bank's spokesperson on African affairs and held managerial positions, including Director of the World Bank Institute Global Media Development Program. He also led the Africa Region Strategic Communications, supervising a team of over 80 communications professionals in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Chinje notably served as Director of External Affairs and Communications at the African Development Bank from 2004 to 2008. He has been a correspondent for renowned media outlets such as CNN World Report, BBC World Service, Voice of America, among others. His accomplishments have earned him many prestigious honors, and his expertise will undoubtedly enrich our conference discussions. Allow me to welcome Mr. Eric Chinje.
Media TV tubaniriza once again omukolo gutandise abakulu batandise.
I'm not sure why of all Africans, 1 billion of us, I got called up to speak to you today. Not exactly sure why. I think it's because I come from a country that is very similar to Uganda. The president of Cameroon, Mr. Paul Biya, has been president for 41, almost 42 years. And I have known him and worked with him prior to leaving Cameroon. And I have watched, I've been out of the country for over 30 years now. I've watched Cameroon from a distance. I go there all the time. I was in Cameroon last week. And in my work, and I'm trying to tell you why I'm here. In my work, I've had to interact with a lot of African leaders, going back to Mobutu Sese Seko, whom I worked with, and he came to trust, if you believe it, all the way to Sir Johnson, and I mentioned her because she's the woman who first elected female president in Africa. And a host of them, the last one I worked with was Eric, my namesake of Botswana, President Sisi. The reason I say this is to, I hope, convince you that I'm qualified to speak. You never know. But you know, I have also taken the time to reflect on the African condition. Why are we not succeeding? Why is this continent of 1 billion+ people, with all the natural resources that it has, why is it not working? There's got to be a problem. It can't, you know, I've tried to blame God, but that's not good enough. I think if it's God's fault, he must have a reason. And the challenge for us is to find that reason. And pray for it to change. Because I hear that God hears prayers. So something is not happening. Something is not right. I've sat in this room and heard you all charged up by Dr. Daniels, Professor Daniels, the one who spoke before. I've heard that. And I could see the emotional charge in this room. And I've seen emotional charges across the continent. And nothing is changing. You've got to take a step back. You cannot do the same things over and over and expect a different result. You all know that. You've got to take a step back. Why is Mr. Bia in Cameroon there for 40 years? I'm here with my sister, Ufi, who's the vice chancellor in one of the universities in Cameroon. So she's high up in the system. I don't say this so you attack my sister. And we have these exchanges all the time. How does a guy survive in power for that long? And what will it take to change the dynamics of things in the country? I'm hoping that in the next few minutes I'll be able to convince you to take that step back, rethink a few things, and do what is necessary to move your country forward. And I know Uganda will not move forward, just as much as Cameroon will not move forward, as long as these people are there, the Musevenis and the Bias of the world. I don't say that to, again, charge you emotionally. No. I say that because I want you guys to take that step back and think. I was looking at Uganda. Looking at this country that has such wealth, agricultural wealth. What is happening? How much of your agricultural produce are transformed in Rwanda, in Uganda? I was looking at the tourism industry. You have one of the most beautiful countries on the continent. What innovations have taken place in the last 30 years to ensure that Uganda becomes the touristic heaven and actually attracts people? Because it's when tourists come that the tourism industry has meaning. What have you done to attract them? What have you done in manufacturing and processing foods and other things? And there are all these sectors. You know, you're one of the countries they're talking about, and it's maybe the reason Museveni wants to stick around, because of the oil that has been discovered. Think about who is exploiting that oil and what they're doing about it. And if you go the way most African countries have gone, you will not have a petrochemical industry, which would be the natural next step from producing oil. No country, not even Nigeria, with all the oil it produces, not even Angola, has a petrochemical industry. Why are you guys not thinking ahead and preparing for that? Because if you do not, and this is maybe the most important point I want to make, if you do not create wealth in that country, if you do not create wealth and distribute wealth, you're not going to make a single difference in your country. So what you should all be focusing on is how we create wealth in Uganda. Bobi Wine should be talking about that over everything else. Even if it means, Museveni will steal those ideas. He'll steal them, but he'll do nothing with them, because the endemic corruption will not allow him to do anything with those ideas. So think about how we create wealth in Uganda. And you'll create wealth based on what you already have. That's the irony. Look, I started off by saying maybe we should ask God. If you ask God, He will laugh and tell you to go back and see where you are. Because He'll say, I've given you everything it takes to create the wealth you need to create. And if you don't do that, your country's not going to move forward. So look at each of your regions in the country. Look at all, whether you're in Western Uganda, in East, in the center, or wherever. There are very specific things you have that you can work on to generate revenue and make life better. That's what this is all about. If you cannot make life better for the majority of citizens, your politics is, it's nonsense. So I'm hoping that you all, my one message, the NUP should be to move away from politics of politicians. Move away from that. Because in country after country after country, yes. I sat with President Masisi. Just when he was campaigning, he was not sure of winning. Because his predecessor was against it. Masisi of Botswana. We sat for coffee and there were two of us. He sat on the floor. And I was like, wow, he's the president. Because he was campaigning while he was president. Instead of sitting on the comfortable seats I was sitting in, he decided to say, no, I want to relax. And when we spoke, what I'm telling you now was the kind of discussion I had with him. And I was so confident that finally there's an African leader
Washington DC.
who will be different. Who will, he's inheriting a fairly good economy for Botswana. And I thought he would just move to the highest heights. And he turned out to be, from what I'm told, I've not been back because of the disappointment. Corruption, his family is wealthy, they are the ones who control the wealth of the country. And as I said, if you cannot think of how you create and distribute wealth, you'll just be like the rest of them. If Bobi Wine doesn't think about that and build a program around that, he'll be like the rest of them. Doesn't matter how excited you all are about him. I have to clap for the guy who started the clapping. You know why? Because you understand what I'm saying. You understand where I'm trying to go with this. It's not about the emotionalisms of the moment. That's not what we need. As I said earlier, I am involved with a group of, there are under 10 of us, about 6, in Cameroon, rethinking that country. We are rethinking Cameroon, coming up with ideas that we will inject into the social discourse in that country, in the hope that by the time Mr. Biya leaves, and we hope it's in another year or two, we will have the ideas we need to build our economy and to build our country. And I'll tell you where we're starting. We've come to the conclusion, my little group, and we're going to propose this to the nation, to citizens. We've come to the conclusion that the first thing we want to focus on as a government is health. The health sector. And that everything you do should depart from health and reinforce the health of citizens. Health. Your economy should be a health-oriented economy. Your tourism, everything you do should be health-oriented. Your agriculture, think about this. If the wealth you generated in the agricultural sector had at the base base of it, the preservation and the promotion of the health of citizens. They'll eat well. They will, children will be born knowing that they can worry about everything, but not about their health. Once your health is guaranteed, you become dynamic, strong, forward-looking, because even this country, America, doesn't have that. This country doesn't have that. So you'll even be different. Health as the basis of all government action. If you want to start thinking about that, think about all the things you can do in all the sectors of the economy, in all areas of wealth creation, if you departed from the fact that every Ugandan will be guaranteed health from the day they are born. Think about that.
2023.
And then as you go from there, in our countries, we were told you're born, you're trained, you work, and then you retire. The group I'm working with, we've decided we're going to tell citizens no more retirement. We will retire the word retirement. Why? Because we agreed amongst ourselves that when a child is born, education starts in the family. The first 6 years, 7 years, in the family. So we have to organize our societies in ways that allow families to train the children who are born. What are the ideas that we generate? What do we tell them to do to support those children in their early years? And then beyond that, it's formal education, primary, secondary, post-secondary schools. And then beyond that, it's the professional training, and you're moving into the professions. So the state is constantly organized in a way that will support this child who's been born, this individual. You're born, you're trained in the family, you're trained in schools, you're trained in institutions, you get into professional life, and then think about this. By the time you are out of professional life and you're being told you must go on retirement, that's when you are the most enriched individual, the most enriched citizen, because of all the education and experiences that you now combine. So at 60 is when you should be, I'm not saying that because I'm 60 and beyond, but at 60 is when you can give the most to your country. So your country should organize itself to tap into that energy instead of throwing you out to go on retirement. Think about that. I know that the people who clap for me were those who are 60 or in that neighborhood. But this is the truth. We've got to think differently. That's the challenge of Africa today. We've got to think differently. I worked for the World Bank for 20 years. I worked for the African Development Bank in senior positions for 5. And I worked in my country. And I came to realize that the ideas that they ship to us are not the ideas that we need necessarily. They'll never tell you that, Uganda got suspended the other day by the World Bank. I know a lot of people were happy about it. I was, but for a different set of reasons. I was because you don't need aid. Uganda does not need aid. If like I tell, even in my own country, Cameroon, we don't need aid. There's enough wealth in the land to generate and take care of everything we need. our infrastructure building, the innovations we need, buying the technologies that we need, providing the hospitals and the schools and so on. There is enough money in the land to get all of that if we organize ourselves. So, Mr. Bobi Wine and the supporters of this young man, for whom I have so much respect, please help him be different. Help him be different. It's not your emotional charge that's going to make him different. No. It's your ability to take a step back and say, look, if we're going to be different, we have to come up with different set of ideas. We've got to think differently about who we are. We've got to think differently about that child who's just been born, about the citizen that that child will become. You've got to think differently about that. And if you do, you may help that child become the citizen of a state that provides leadership to Africa. And Uganda has the ability to do that. Uganda can do that. You're the pearl of Africa, aren't you? So, ladies and gentlemen, I know I shouldn't be, maybe we should engage in some exchange of questions. Yeah. I was going to give a formal presentation, but I don't like doing that. I prefer to speak because I believe that what comes from the heart to the heart. So, I'll take any questions. But if you like for me to just continue talking, I will. I'm a talker. I'm a journalist, Like Remy Bahati, who's a journalist. He's in the room.
I'm here.
Yes, sir.
Again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My question that I was going to ask you is the problem of Africa.
YouTube.
And after that, I'm going to put you on record, then you explain it your own way. So you're on camera. So, in 1956, if you read history, Kk Nkrumah was in America studying and went back to Africa to fight liberate Africa. And the Pan-African movement was born there at that time, when we were still in colonialism that was oppressing us, and we wanted the liberation to build a new Africa. When Kk Nkrumah took over government, all the African leaders that were being oppressed with colonialism by the Portuguese, the British, the so-called, went to him. But they had first gone to America to ask for support to liberate themselves, which the American did not offer. And Kk Nkrumah referred them to the Soviet bloc. Africa came from colonialism and went direct into communism and socialism with its bad government, bad economic system, and everything. That means the African problem to this day was the ideology that is still existing between the West and the East. Now I'm going to ask you, don't you think that we must begin from there and change the ideology of Africa, starting with Uganda? That is my question.
Thank you. As a matter of fact, you just said what I said, but put it in a different context of language. What I said essentially is free your mind. I told you I work for development institutions, the most important development institutions on the continent, World Bank, Development Bank, and the rest of it. And I realized that what they were pushing in Africa should not be, we don't need to, there's something they call structural adjustment. That destroyed the country, destroyed our economy. So clearly they're not giving us anything we should be adopting. We should free our minds, think about what God gave us, and I mentioned that, and see how we can transform what God gave us into wealth that we distribute fairly, starting with health. That's my story. I'm so happy when somebody claps because it tells me you understood what I'm saying. Can you guys just... I'm kidding, if you clap for me or you don't, it makes no difference to me. Believe me, I'll finish here and walk out of here. Hello. But I want you to understand what I'm saying. I really want you to understand what I'm saying. Because for a number of reasons. One, I believe I am here because I believe Uganda can and should be different. I'm here because I want Bobi Wine, who continues to fascinate me, to succeed in what he's trying to do.
I'm here not for ideology. I'm here to say that we can think differently. We can free our minds. We can again go back to the drawing board, go back to the basics, look at what we have, and say, what can we do with what we have? As a matter of fact, when you go to heaven, God's going to ask you, what did you do with what I gave you? That's the question. So let's look at what we have and say, what do we do with what we have? What do we have in Uganda? How do we use that to make our lives better? The whole point is about improving the quality of life of citizens.
So yeah, let's go back to the Nkrumahs and the rest. They brought us independence. They may have made their mistakes with regard to ideology because of the pressures that they were receiving. We don't even need that. We don't need that. Let's step back and do what we need to do.
When the struggle is over,
Nup TV, President Oyo Ayingiddewo, President Robert Nabanjanta Ayingiddewo, agenda constitution mu budde bwe, President Ayingiddewo, President Ayingiddewo, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Uganda, Robert Sentamukyala Ayingiddewo.
Welcome, Bobi. I'm even more encouraged because it's a very young man. I thought it was a little older than he actually was.
YouTube channel.
My brother Bobi, my young brother. I've said a lot of things that will be reported to you. And I hope somebody does. And if they don't do it properly, he will tell you how to get to me. I'll work with you, and we'll get Africa to work with you. All right. It's a place for these emotional outbursts. We are Africans. We need to have it. But at the end of it, let's take a step back and think. Let's use our heads to see where we make a difference. It's important. Anyway, they'll report to you. So, he's coming. Maybe I should take one or two more questions. I really should not be standing here when Bobi Wine is in the room, but I'll take one or two questions. Here, yes, sir.
Hi, thank you so much for encouraging us to do more than use emotion to change Africa. But you have to consider the realities. So considering that structural adjustments that the World Bank promotes haven't worked, and considering that most African leaders, including Museveni, are put in power to give the Western countries advantages, how would you suggest that somebody like the Honorable Bobi Wine starts creating wealth, considering that he doesn't even collect taxes in a country and a situation whereby even trying to find membership or distributing pads to school-age children will bring the police, people are tear gas, people are shot at. So how do we marry the realities of what Africa is and then also be practical in bringing up people up to speed to the 21st century?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. And I'll answer that, but before I do, I want to tell you that Bobby, I'm from Cameroon, so I've lived the same difficulties under a leadership that has been there for the last 4 decades. And the head of the opposition in Cameroon, he just died not too long ago. It's the Frundi, you might have heard of it, Nijan Frundi. He passed away not too long last month. And we're from the same family. As a matter of fact, when I was born, Frundi was living with my parents. And his slogan was, power to the people. To this day, everybody when they think about the opposition in Cameroon and they think about what was achieved, the name, they will tell you, meet any Cameroonian and find out, they'll tell you, it's Nijan Frundi. It was a cousin of mine. And I had occasion to talk to him one-on-one a lot of times. And after 30 years, my sister was reminding me today, during his eulogy, they said he fought for 30 years and left the country worse than when he started, and which is true. Cameroon is far worse today than 30 years ago when Frundi moved that country. And of course, if you ask him, he'll tell you, and when he was here before he went, a few months before he passed away, and I was with him in Atlanta, and he'll tell you, he said, well, they have the power. They have the army, they have the treasury, this way it works. They have the military, they have the treasury, they have the international relations, they can get loans from the IMF and the World Bank and so on. This was funny, and I have nothing. And I told him, the only reaction I could have was this. I said, but you moved the country. Everywhere you went, thousands came out to see you. What do you think moved them? Was it the money you had? Did you give them money to come out? When the president, Mr. Biya, goes out, they give money to people. Did they give you? Did you give citizens money to come out and see you? I said, it was the power of your ideas. That's what moved them. It was the power of your ideas. That's what moved them. And what we've been talking about today is the power of ideas. Challenge, let Ugandan citizens know that you have ideas that would be different from anything Mr. Museveni has to offer them, different from the money and the military and the coercion and what have you. You have the ideas. That's what we've been talking about health, about wealth creation, about agriculture, about transformation, about technology. It's these things. Put them together. You don't, Bobby Wine doesn't need to go out of his house to be arrested again. Just put those ideas and let Ugandans choose. They'll have the choice either to stay in their current state of deprivation and poverty and illness and you name it, or we will do it differently. And this is what we stand for.
Yes, good morning, sir. My name is Robert Kabuya Boston. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. Can't we adapt Obamacare to childline care?
Yes, of course you can. That will be my last answer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
YouTube channel.
Thank you so much, we appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much. And we're going to now jump over. I'm going to invite a very special guest. His name is Bruce Afran, who has worked with us for a while. He's a distinguished civil rights and constitutional lawyer. He graduated from Brooklyn Law School in 1985 and holds a degree in history from State University of New York and Birmingham. He has a career spanning over 3 decades. He has been a leading advocate for civil rights in New Jersey. His legal expertise has been instrumental in cases involving civil rights, domestic surveillance, environmental preservation, corporate fraud, election reform, immigrant rights, and family law. He currently serves as a professor at Rutgers University, teaching First Amendment law and a seminar on corruption law. Bruce frequently consults on matters of international human rights, civil liberty issues, pensions, and securities law, and has argued cases in various states across USA, notably served as the National Elections Counsel to former presidential candidate and consumer advocate Ralph Nader in 2004. Presently, Bruce is the legal advisor to the National Unity Platform, a political party seeking to challenge Yoweri Museveni, and he's going to tell you a lot about the current ICC case we have against Museveni. And so welcome, Mr. Bruce.
Thank you very much. And if you can't hear me, it'll let me know. I don't usually use microphones. We lawyers don't get them in courtrooms. We just have to raise our voices. I'm very gratified to be here and to have been invited here today. As you know, we've spent pretty much a solid 2 years in which we have been gathering evidence and bringing it forward to the ICC and to the world community. But before we talk about that, let me say how I became involved in this movement as an advisor. My interest in Uganda goes back. I'm one of those 60-year-old people Dr. Chingle was talking about. Goes back to when I was in high school. Now, at that time, there was a dictator in office named H.E Amin, and I used to write papers in high school on H.E Amin and his depredations. So I followed Uganda really as a child and later. I have a daughter who runs a summer camp, a Jewish religious camp, and there are 2 young men from Uganda, who are in the Jewish community, who've worked there for many years. So I began speaking to them one visiting day and asked them about the current political situation. And they told me this story. Well, there's this man who's a singer, and he's going to run for president. And he's going to set aside this present dictator we have. Of course, I knew about Museveni. I didn't know about Bobi. And my first contact was with these 2 young men. And I said, look, when you go back at the end of the summer, let them know I'm here and I'm interested in helping them. And through that contact, David Lewis contacted me and several other people, and we began this strategy, the development of this strategy. And when the killings took place in November of that year, before the election, we developed the notion of gathering this evidence and presenting it to the ICC. So we have presented 3 reports thus far, the latest being our formal complaint. Now, let me explain a bit about the ICC, and to some degree I want to make sure we don't build up hope in the wrong direction, rather than in terms of the right direction. The ICC is a court. Its prosecutors have to make a decision as to what to do. Are you able to hear me? I hear an echo. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. And it's not clear what they do in any given case. Now, we presented 215 affidavits. One of them was Bobby's, actually, detailing torture, human rights abuses, murder, psychological abuses. Now, originally, we didn't have that. Our first two reports were from the media. But then we were able to gather over a period of a year with the help of many people, a collection of dossiers under oath describing in detail what has happened. This changes the picture. We're no longer submitting what's in the media to the court, but we're submitting affidavits under oath stating what happened to individuals. And we know most of those stories. You probably know a lot of them. You probably know people who have been victimized. People are taken off the street. They're dragged into cars. They're often beaten on the floor of the car for hours as they drive to a detention center. There, they're often forced into psychological torture, dancing for 12 or 15 hours in a row. Sometimes they make them listen to Bobby's music, actually, and they think that's a torture. They don't realize that's actually giving hope to the victim. But they make them dance for 12, 15 hours, and they beat them when they fall. Then they whip them with wires. Sometimes they electrocute them. One man was told, certifies, and he was told to urinate into a hole that was wired, and he was then electrocuted. People have had pieces of their body pulled off, pincers taking their flesh off, fingers cut off, testicles damaged, if not pulled off. Vicious torture is practiced by ordinary Ugandans who are following orders. And this is one of the points of the ICC case, that it's not just going to be Museveni and his son. Ultimately, it will be anyone who takes place in these actions. We've listed 26 officials, some of them relatively low-ranking in our complaints. One of them was Speaker Amon, who associated herself with the torture center. Another is General Lew, who we know what he has done. But others are lower-ranking, unknown sometimes. And the point of this process is that we know who is doing these things. And when a soldier or a police officer decides to participate, and many don't, many are loyal to the Constitution and the law, but some are not. Some are scared, so they go along. Some want power, so they do this. But we will know who they are. You can take your name tag off, but you can't hide your voice, and you can't always hide your face. And people have a way of knowing. Ultimately, the law will descend upon those who do these things. Museveni, Muhuzi, and others. But also the police officer and the soldier, the ordinary person who engages in these tortures. Now, those of you who are in the 60s will remember East Germany. Those of you who are 30 or 35 might not be that familiar with this history. But if you remember East Germany, it was a communist government formed after World War II. West Germany was democratic. And in East Germany, people were shot as they tried to leave the country, as they tried to go over the fence or go over the wall. Some were arrested and abused in prison. And when the communists fell, and they fell peacefully, they left power in 1989 and 90, those officials and those guards who did those things were put on trial. And the reason they were put on trial was very simple. They violated German law. They took that power, and they assumed as an attribute of sovereignty that they could abuse the human rights of those who disagreed with them. But the law was always there. The law was always there in front of them. They chose to disregard it. And so when the communist regime left power, many of these people were put on trial. Museveni and Muhoozi and those working with them have developed a false understanding of power. Power is always mediated ultimately by the force of law. What these people have done not only violates international law and human rights law, it violates Uganda law. And there will be a change of authority in Uganda. There will be a change of government. And when that happens, the law will still be there. And that's the point of the ICC process. We don't know what the ICC will ultimately do in this case or any other given case. We know in the Incase case, they concluded, although these things happened, there was not a sufficient pattern to warrant international prosecution. Fair enough. Maybe that was a wrong decision. We don't know what they will say here. We don't know how they will balance this case versus other cases. But what we are doing with the ICC case is something much bigger than just the ICC. What we are doing is we are beginning the process of holding to the law those who break the law. Those who break human beings, those who abuse human beings. That is ultimately why we have brought this case. It almost does not matter what the ICC says, because we have gathered the evidence, and that evidence will be used someday in some forum, whether it's in a freed Uganda court, or in the ICC, or in some other state court, such as Spain, that maintains universal jurisdiction over torture. That evidence will be used. But it's being used right now in a very big way. Remember all that talk about Muhoozi succeeding his father? You know, Muhoozi is going to be the next in line, as if Africans somehow just accept a king anointing his son. Muhoozi is no longer considered by anyone to be next in line. You remember the New York Times headline? Did you all see that? Museveni and Muhoozi and his son Muhoozi identified as running torture centers. And then there's the Guardian headline, even worse for them. Those discredit these people. Muhoozi is no longer looked on by anyone as a successor to anything. He will no longer have legitimacy or credibility. That is partly why we have gathered this evidence and brought it to the world's attention. And so remember, we don't know what the ICC prosecutor will do. They must look at this evidence and decide not if it happened, not if it broke the law, but whether they have jurisdiction in particular. We don't know what they will say. But what we have done is we have brought the force of evidence and law to the forefront of the world in connection with this regime. That is the fundamental point of what we're doing. So when you speak to people, make them realize that what we've done is much more than just ask the ICC to take the case. We have begun the process of holding this regime accountable to the law. And that is the fundament of what we are doing. I'd like to speak a little bit about related issues. Ultimately, all dictatorships fail. They all fail. Now, it's very interesting. I took the train down with my wife yesterday from Princeton, and the conductor decided he would be a historical guide, so he kept on giving a talk over the loudspeaker on the train, discussing American history. And one thing he said, I sat up and was shocked. He said, you know, when George Washington became the first president of the U.S., he served 2 terms and deliberately retired to set a precedent. That was one of the great moments of history, by the way, that a president had willingly left office He could have stayed on, he could have been a king for life, but he left office to set a precedent. And the conductor said, well, you know, when we started out in America, and he was actually a man from the Caribbean, so he was basically taking on America as his own. He said, we didn't have presidents for life. And I sat up and I said, well, that's an idea. No presidents for life. Now, what does that remind me of? The point is that Ugandans also are waking up to the absurdity of a man who thinks he should serve as their elected leader for 40 years. And the work we've done with the ICC gathers the evidence that shocks people into a consciousness that enough is enough. Now in 2026, I believe this gentleman here will be running for president. And the people of Uganda will again vote, and they do vote. And there is an election, and there are millions of people who vote. And nobody keeps people from the polling place. They may try to rip up the ballots afterwards, or they may add several 100,000 ballots to the box. We have nice films showing that. But ultimately, the power of a dictator to maintain forcible rule through election does depend on people voting. You can only fake so many votes. You can't fake 5 million votes. You might fake 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 and alter the balance. But because of what we've done and the evidence we've manifested, I believe very deeply that the people of Uganda in 2026 will collectively begin to say to themselves, this is enough. You know, we heard that man on the train and say there are no presidents for life. It came across the Atlantic right to Africa, and they said, we know we don't have to have presidents for life. And I think the evidence we've manifested and the proof of what has been happening is going to shock people in Uganda into changing how they vote. Now, most voted for Bobi Wine, obviously. But enough were conservative and loyal to the original Museveni, who came out as a liberal, that they did vote for him. Some did. But that's going to change in 2026, because dictatorships fail when the psychology of the people changes. That's the fundamental point of dictatorship. When the psyche of the voter, of the citizen shifts, the dictator loses authority. Now, after we released our complaint and the New York Times ran a story, Bobi took a tour. Was it Eastern Uganda, Bobi? I think it was. And number one, he was on the radio. Usually the regime blocks the radio station. Bobi can't even get a hotel room because they threaten all the hotel managers. But this time they didn't. The New York Times headlines spoke around the world. And some people may wonder, well, why did we wait? Why didn't we hold a press conference? The New York Times very carefully approached me for about 4 weeks. And finally we decided that we will let them have the story. And the headline they issued has the effect almost of a statement, almost of U.S. policy. That headline was very significant. From that moment on, Museveni and his regime could no longer actively interfere with Bobi's actions. And not only did Bobi have unlimited use of the radio, but he traveled and a group of 100,000 people were with him. That's right. Imagine that, 100,000 people, and they were left totally unimpeded by the government. The government can no longer arbitrarily arrest and abuse people, at least in public. 3 months ago, they would have broken up that group and not let it gather. 3 months ago, Bobi would not have got anyone near a radio. But that changed. And that's the power of law when the evidence is publicized around the world. And undoubtedly, this pattern can continue. Now imagine a group of 100,000 people protesting, standing with Bobi, standing at a rally, and the police or the army begin to shoot. Imagine how that will look to the world. Does anyone think Museveni now will dare to take that chance? That will create the indictment. That will yield the immediate indictment by the ICC. We'll have no choice. And so we have already shifted the psychological dynamic in Uganda. And remember, all dictatorship is psychological in the end. And dictatorship ends when the people change, and when the dictator knows that he can no longer continue with business as usual. Now, if you remember Romania, there was a communist leader by the name of Ceausescu. Now, Ceausescu ran a pretty vicious Stalinist regime. And all of a sudden, in 1989, he fled. Now, there are other forces building up in Poland and East Germany challenging the communist dictatorships. Ceausescu gave a speech. And all of a sudden, instead of having an obeisant crowd cowering to what he said, people started booing.
Yes. Yep.
Do you remember this? And Ceausescu had never heard a boo in his life.
He offered a raise to the people.
Ah, that's right. And so Ceausescu fled. That was the end of his regime. And he fled for one reason. He understood the psychology of the people had changed. And when that moment is met, the regime's power fails. So the next time there is a gathering of 100,000 or 200,000 or more, the regime has two choices. It can fire or round people up and abuse them and be seen in the entire world community as doing so. Or it can take the legally safe approach and allow the protest and gathering to continue. Either way, and this is the beauty of it, either way, its power is gone. If it shoots, its power is gone. It's a criminal regime. And if it can't shoot and is forced to allow the protest to continue, its psychological power is gone. And that is what happened. And that is what we saw with those 100,000 people who accompanied Bobi. This is the beginning of the term. Now, it takes a long time for a large vessel to make a turn. An aircraft carrier will take a nice hour and a half just to turn around. A country is a bit of an aircraft carrier, but this is the beginning of the term. The credibility of the regime is now challenged, damaged, and in fact destroyed by the evidence, not by the ICC complaint, but by the evidence we brought forward. And so it does not matter what, in the end, the ICC chooses to do. This is the message I would like to ask you to take away with you. What matters is the evidence that we've manifested and the change in the world's understanding of what has happened. When those 54 people, probably 100, were killed in November of that year, Museveni was able to get away with saying, well, there were officers who overreacted. But no one can get away with saying there were officers who overreacted when we read these 215 affidavits. We have 4 individuals who identify Lieutenant General Mahuzi, an absurd title if ever there was one, running and operating and commanding torture centers. 4 individuals who were abused brutally, and we have their affidavits. One of whom is Kakwenza, whom you know. The others are going to be confidential still. Who defined the abuse they experienced in detail, and then they each say they were called into a meeting at the torture center with Mahuzi. Mahuzi was in command of these centers. And we now have the evidence that demonstrates that. Muhoozi is identified as an individual operating a criminal enterprise. And that's an extraordinarily serious fact. So bear in mind what we've achieved is the delegitimization of this regime. And that is the fundamental achievement thus far. Now, this is not the end of it, obviously. We don't know what the ICC will do, but we know it must continue. Obviously, Bobi's work continues, without question. But Bobi can't be alone. We've given new protection to the people of Uganda through this process. But that protection must be used. Freedom doesn't come from the outside. No nation was ever freed from dictatorship by outsiders, by a court or by a government from abroad or by the UN or anyone else. Dictatorship and authoritarianism end only internally. Now, we're not stopping this process, but it can't just be this process. The people of Uganda must now take this newfound protection and use it. And one of the things I've learned in this work is that Ugandans culturally are very nice people. And generally very calm and generous and loving people. Now, that being said, it's a little hard, if that's the way you see the world, to stand in the streets and protest. So we have to marry that wonderful culture to the need to speak out. Because remember, authoritarians benefit from the decency of the people of their country. Remember in America, there were almost no slave rebellions. Do you know that? As bad as slavery was in this country, there were almost no slave rebellions. And slaves often were the vast majority of the population and were skilled. Many knew how to use weapons, many knew how to use tools. They could have overcome their white masters in the South, but they didn't. Because they were decent human beings who didn't want to kill the people they had grown up with. And that's how slavery maintained its power. By capitalizing on the inherent decency of its victims. And that's what dictators do. They know the average person does not believe in violence, and they can capitalize on it. Now, Dr. King showed us something, and Bobi does exactly the same thing, that the peaceful protest is powerful. So we have to take that decency in the Ugandan people and merge it to peaceful protest. We've given protection through the ICC, but now we need to take that a step further. People need to understand. They need to speak out in Uganda and join together en masse. There was a thought I had and I just lost it. I apologize. That's the essential message, that we've started the process. We have delegitimized this regime. We've delegitimized it in the world's understanding through this evidence and in the understanding of the people of Uganda. But that can't be all. The people of this nation must inherently bring that forward. Oh, I'm not going to say it. Gandhi once wrote that the most violent and powerful form of protest he knows of in India was a hunger strike. And that's a strange thing to say. Because Indians by nature are so concerned about their neighbor that when they see someone on a hunger strike, they become violently angry at the cause of the hunger strike. And so the decency and humanity of people can be made into something that lets us speak out. And that's the essential message I wanted to leave, that we take this forward. We went to the ICC. They may take this case. We brought our evidence. We delegitimized this government. The Ugandan people are now seeing it differently. We've taken the power of oppression away from Museveni in many respects. Now we must use that. And so I would encourage people to speak out in Uganda and to engage in peaceful protest. Because there is now protection that comes from the rule of law. By the way, do you remember the Daily Monitor article that came out, I guess it was 2.5 weeks ago? 2 front-page stories derived from the ICC case. That was rather extraordinary. That's a demonstration of the new weakness of the regime and the strength of those who wish to speak out. The law has given us this power. So I want to thank you all for hearing me out today. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm certainly happy. I don't know what time we have. But I'm certainly happy to answer a few questions. And I want to acknowledge Bobi Wine and what he has done. I mean, it's truly extraordinary that he has committed himself personally in this way. You know, there is danger in this work, and we've seen that happen. And I just want to acknowledge that, and the leadership of the NUP, David Lewis and others, I don't have everyone's name, and Barbie for her commitment. Because this movement requires people dedicated, and then they can lead. And so I want to acknowledge that. And thank you all for the opportunity to serve in this way. So if anyone has questions, I'm really happy to.
I used to work with the United Nations for a long time. Our problem with ICC was privately as staff members. It does not seem to have arrest power in any country. For example, a few years ago, I think Sudanese former President had an ICC arrest warrant for many years. It went on, many other countries not arrested. Specifically, he went to South Africa, I think African Union meeting or something. I personally too thought South African government at the time was credible. They would obey the ICC arrest warrant and facilitate ICC to arrest him. He came laughing until internally they organized themselves. My problem is, what if Museveni and his group decide to fly to Putin's place, Beijing, or South Africa? Shouldn't the ICC at least impound airspace when they know they're on the flight? Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Unfortunately, they can't impound the airspace, but the ICC does have a power, and that is most governments will arrest on that warrant an ICC, a person who's been indicted by the ICC. Now, not every government, Putin and China, do not follow the rule of law. We can't expect that. But I can tell you this, Museveni and Mobutu can no longer really travel freely. They might make it to Kenya. That's pretty much where their range of power ceases. They're afraid. Russia is a lawless country. It doesn't follow the rule of law. But you can't stop them, you can't pull the plane down. But really, there is a power of arrest. Most governments will arrest someone. So their power, their place to move is limited. If they show up in Spain or France or Germany or the US, they'll be arrested. Then they'll be taken in handcuffs to the Hague. So there is a real power. Nothing is perfect, but remember, the goal of what we're doing is to demonstrate the reality of what has happened. And even if the ICC doesn't act officially. By the way, I want to say one thing. There's a lot of talk now about whether the ICC focuses too much on African governments. All right, you've all heard that. As if somehow it's racist to investigate African dictators who abuse human rights. This is a bogus argument. It is not racist to investigate African dictators. It is protecting the rights of African people. to investigate those dictators. And the notion that somehow it's a racist act to focus on African governments is nonsense. This is designed to protect the rights of the people who live there. And so disabuse yourselves of that notion. Thank you. Any, I don't know how much time we have, but any other questions, I'm happy to. I don't control the questioning.
Mr. President, the presenter, thank you for your elaborate presentation. My question is going to be short but direct. What will be the time frame to get the tangible result in terms of your legal experience? That's number one. Number two, Museveni as a corrupt leader, what can you as a person do to his proxies like the lobbyists who can influence those people who make a decision in the ICU? Because some of us, we may have this outcome, but sometimes we may be worried because Museveni has been in power for so long and is a corrupt guy who can underground influence the decision in that court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad your question was direct but potent. Okay? And the question really is, doesn't Museveni have enough power to corrupt the process? That's really what you're asking, I think. Let me answer it this way, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful. I think you are being a little overawed by the perception of Museveni's power. It's very easy to assume the person in power can somehow pull strings around the world. Now, Uganda does have a delegate on the ICC, but it doesn't mean that the ICC is going to be swayed by that individual. And remember something, that individual knows there's a day of reckoning coming. And they may not be willing to sell out for Museveni. So don't assume the power of Museveni exists at all internationally, and don't assume that his minions will necessarily follow suit. They too are worked, and that's the idea of this process. As far as the timeline goes, that's impossible to say. And in a real sense, it doesn't matter to us. As long as this investigation goes on, and it hangs over the head of this government, there is power in that. So don't worry about how long it takes. I hope I've answered your questions.
If you don't mind, could you talk a little bit more, because I wanted to sink deep in the analogy you gave to Ceausescu. Before you said that, I was scribbling a note to send to you. I wanted you to mention Ceausescu, because this is a powerful dictator who's addressing the people, and then somebody decides to move. The first person to move. And what did he do? He offered to double everybody's salary. But instead, that increased the booth. And that's an important point for Assistant President Uganda to sink deep in. So could you expand on that?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And I apologize, I have no idea what our time frame is, but I assume the controlling parties will tell me. So thank you. I saw you nodding vigorously when I mentioned Ceausescu, Bobi too, actually. It's an amazing chapter in history that this Stalinist dictator who had enormous power in Romania somehow understood he had to leave power because the crowd turned on him. It was simple speech, like he'd given hundreds and hundreds of times before, and all of a sudden the crowd turned on him. So he offers to raise salaries, and it gets worse. And this is why, with respect to the gentleman who raised the question about corruption of Museveni, ultimately corruption won't work. Offer more money. But once the people have gotten to a point of moral anger and understand that what has happened transgresses rules of decency, you can bribe them all you want, it's not going to change anything. Ceausescu attempted that in that talk, clumsily, and it got worse for him. Museveni, by the way, every single person who has been arrested and kept in detention in Uganda, including Bobi, actually, has been offered a bribe. They've been offered the opportunity. Bobi was offered bribes indirectly. I I think people were told, we tell Bobi Wine we have something for him. We have a job in government for him. Other people were given legal jobs. They were offered law jobs. People were offered money. And I believe Stephanie meant it. He would have given them money. But they did not accept it. And in fact, it makes it worse. And so by trying to bribe the people, once people have reached a point of moral outrage, the problem gets worse for the regime. So I firmly believe that this good example, I think I lost it, is important to understand that once that psychology changes, the regime can't go back again. And I think we're at that point now, and we need to enhance that process. Yes, is there any other question?
Okay, let me take this chance to thank the presenter. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce, for giving us light regarding ICC. My name is Isaac Atomsange from Itiana. My major concern with the ICC is regarding the way you are implementing your policy. I wanted to know that does it require someone from moving from the government, then can people to the court, ICC? Because we have seen so many cases being committed by the current government. But you see the ICC is close in your hands. You don't react. Is it in your policy that someone else must be moved to the power, then it can be taken to the court? And then you also need to thank you so much that you said that.
I'm sorry if I could interrupt. I apologize, but you're going too fast. I couldn't quite follow you.
Sorry, let me be slow. I said that, is it under the ICC policy to take the people who have committed crime, give their time in the government after they have been removed, or they can be questioned before they have been removed? Because we have seen it in Uganda, the government showing their name and they have this family, they have put enough cases to be answered in the ICC court. What are you waiting for? Then another question, another protest, I also want to comment that. You say that most of the dictators cannot be removed by external causes, which is quite close, and I really agree with you. The question is, what have you done to support those suffering people down there in their government, under their government rules? Because the people are trying to react, they have gone to the streets, but you see that the ICC is closing their door. What are you waiting for that basis to help these vulnerable Ugandan Africans who are suffering down there?
I think you're saying, why is the ICC waiting? Is that the basic thrust of the question?
No, we also want to know, do they only indict and pursue after the repeal of power? And I guess, who will take it over the president?
But he also thinks your ICC.
I'm sorry.
He also thinks you're part of the ICC.
I was wondering that.
Yeah, he probably clarified.
Thank you. To the gentleman who asked the question. First of all, if your question was suggesting that I am part of the ICC in some way, that's not correct. So I was puzzled when I said, what are you doing? When you said, what are you doing? And I didn't quite get that. I am not with the ICC. I'm simply a lawyer, and on behalf of Bobi and Amos Katumba and others, I have filed papers with the ICC as a lawyer representing a group of people, and in this case, 215 victims. So to begin with, I'm not part of them. We have asked their prosecutor, who is a lawyer working for the ICC, to launch their own investigation. That's the first step. And so what we do is we ask them, we say to them, we have the evidence that justifies the inquiry. We want you to launch your investigation. We're asking them to do that, and they're an independent force. No one can tell them what to do, and they'll act as they see fit. Now, obviously, everybody in some way is political. Does the ICC respond to political forces? Probably not. but they might respond to criticism that we look too much at Africa. We can't stop that negativity if it happens. However, we have given them the evidence to work with. The second point is, they do not only go after a person once they're out of power. Putin's not out of power. They indicted Putin, for example. They indicted Milosevic, who was in power in Serbia. And so the ICC's power is not used only to those who have been forced out. They use their authority to those who are in power. And that's very important. If a sitting president, or a general, or a speaker of the House is indicted by the ICC, they lose all international legitimacy, except perhaps in China or Russia. South Africa, maybe. That's a bit of a hybrid problem. Yeah, well, Putin's never leaving Russia, I can tell you that. So they don't go only after those who are out of power, they go after those who are in power. I think that addressed your questions. I'm not sure if there's another aspect to it.
So we have one more question here, the last one for you.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. My fears, not so different from those aired out by one of my colleagues, except that mine are not born out of the perception of Museveni's power, but the weaknesses in the international system of which the ICC is part. That the examples that you have pointed out of people that have been held accountable may be out of coincidence, but have only taken place when there has been policy shift in the Western capitals. And why I'm asking is the supplementary role that for us who are not in the court, but are citizens of Uganda and friends of Uganda, the role that we need to play to supplement the efforts of those that are pushing the case in court. Because many cases, and this has been part of the debate about the effectiveness of the ICC, is that many times the dictators, the violators of human rights, who enjoy the protection of powerful governments in the global system, are not held accountable. And the one we are dealing with is one of such people, because of the role he plays in the region for some of those powerful governments. So what roles can we play to supplement your efforts to make sure that the efforts that you are putting in are not frustrated by the interference of the powerful governments of the world whose interests he serves?
Thank you for that very thorough question. It really does get to the core of the problem. Now, obviously, the US and Britain, primarily, are responsible for maintaining Museveni in power. There's no question about that. Israel, to a degree, allows security equipment, surveillance equipment to be sold to Uganda's government as well. Mostly, it is the US and Britain who maintain this regime, both militarily and through money. About $1 billion a year goes to the government, and that helps prop up the government. Now, as Dr. Jingle said before, we don't really need the outside money, do we? It's used as a means of perpetuating those in power that outsiders favor. And that's the problem with foreign aid, and African governments and societies have fallen victim to it. Aid is a weapon used by the West primarily. Our aid is used for political purposes. Now, all of that being said, the US is not an evil regime. It's not going to send troops in to keep Museveni in power. It sponsors him because of a somewhat racial attitude in the US State Department that African governments need, African societies need a strong man to rule. Let's face it, there's this attitude prevailing in the West primarily in the US and Britain, that Africans need a strong man. Never a strong woman, by the way, a strong man. And this is fundamentally a racial conception of how the West sees power in Africa. It's wrong. We've seen many, many examples of democracy in Africa. And it's fundamentally biased and ignorant. It is a racial point of view the US practices. But the US ultimately is not going to use force to keep Museveni or any other ally like that in power. If a democratic election clearly demonstrates he's lost authority, the US will not stand in the way. I don't speak for the US, I'm just analyzing US policy. Don't mistake that, I'm not part of the US government. But ultimately, what role should the Ugandan people play is the question. Now you put the question as what role supplementary to the process can we play? Well, there's, I think, the error, if you don't mind me saying so. Your role in Uganda as Ugandans is not supplementary. Your role is primary. Bobi's role is primary. My role is supplementary. All right, that's what we have to change. We have to change this quiescent obeisance and the notion that somehow outsiders have the primary duty to make this change. I'm a catalyst, but a catalyst makes a reaction. That reaction must be Ugandan. So what role can Ugandans play? Not as supplements, but as citizens who are demanding their rights. Once we change that mental perspective, we change everything. That's the whole point of Bobi's campaign and the NUP's campaign. What role can we play? Well, there's a multiplicity of roles. First of all, Uganda is broken down into a set of local governments. Every town and district has a chair. Is that correct? Those chairs are often independent people. They're not all national resistance movement toadies. Many of them are quite independent. Many of them, probably a majority, support the NUP. You can go to your chair. You can go to your district meetings and speak. You're not going to get arrested for speaking against torture and against the regime. Imagine if 5 million Ugandans went to district meetings all over the country on a given day and spoke about torture. Imagine the impact of that on the regime. That suddenly every district meeting, which the regime can't shut down, has people complaining about torture and abuse. That is one thing that can be done by Ugandans. That is a painless, simple thing, but immensely powerful. That's the first thing. To start to speak out again as citizens. Saying, I have the primary right to be heard. That's the first step. That is not a supplement, that is the primary move. And then the primary move is to organize another 100,000 person gathering. Not even if Bobi is there. Organize it in your own district. Organize a meeting, a public meeting. Hold public meetings in every district, in every city, in every town, in every county. Talking about change. Have a public meeting to talk about changing the Constitution. To get rid of military jurisdiction, which is what is used to arrest people. Have a simple meeting like that. Every district can hold a meeting to discuss whether the Constitution should be amended to eliminate military jurisdiction over the citizen. No one's going to get arrested. That will have immense power. Do this over and over again. And begin to organize public meetings and protests. Yes, in some occasions, the government might react with violence. But they can only do that once or twice and on a small scale. That would be tragic, but people are killed anyway. Far better to begin to assert rights as citizens. I hope I've given some positive examples. There are a myriad of things that can be done. But the first step is to get over the notion that we are Uganda only a subsidiary of this effort. Ugandans are the primary effort. Remember the Arab Spring movements? Those were internal movements. Now, they weren't entirely successful. Some governments later became repressive. But they were not led from the outside. They were led internally. And we have a movement, and it's a legitimized movement. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll close. Uganda was given a great benefit by Britain when Britain left. That benefit was the rule of law. Uganda has a court system. It has lawyers who are well trained. Most are committed to law. Some have become afraid and become tools of the government. But most have within them that core of belief in law. I've met Ugandan lawyers, and they're as competent and thoughtful and well-trained as American lawyers or British lawyers. Uganda was given this legal system. That tradition still exists. You were given a parliamentary system, and that tradition still exists. It's been abused, it's been straightened and foreclosed a bit, but it is still there. All of these tools exist to be used. The district government system is widespread. It is for you to use. Uganda was given an educational system. There are fine universities. There's a well-educated component of the people. Use these strengths. They're there and they're sitting there waiting to be used. They can also be used politically. And so I would say, in closing, the rule of law is what we started with here. The rule of law is what must propel. Remember how Museveni came to power? He came to power through what? Guns. He said, I'm a liberal getting rid of a dictator, but he came to power through a gun. Bobi Wine doesn't have a gun. The NUP does not have a gun. It is a political movement based on the right under the rule of law to be heard. And that is ultimately its strength. Now, we're sitting here peacefully and safely in Arlington next to Washington. Could we have this meeting in Uganda? We might right now. I don't know. We might be able to right now. One could try and see what happens. If you're unwilling to try, then you can't get freedom. Freedom can be taken from the point of a gun, like Museveni has done, but it's also easily lost by fear. And so I would encourage people to leave here with the message that the strength in this movement is much stronger than Museveni and his government. And remember that and take that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce, for that powerful speech. And I think we sometimes forget that the legal system is long. When you file a case, it takes time. So let's all be patient. The evidence is there, and we know we'll get to the promised land one day. Just one comment. If you have a question or comment, because we're only going to take 3 questions going forward. So if you do have a question, please write it down, provide your email, we'll collect it and give it to the specific speaker, and they will get back to you. So we want to go through the program fast today.
One asks a question for the general public platform. What?
Yeah, that's true.
I'll come and talk to you, mister. So, right now I would like to invite the Madam Vice President of the Diaspora here in the US, Madam Leila from Boston.
People power, our power, people power, NUP, everywhere. Thank you so much. Mr. Bruce, thank you so much for that very insightful presentation about ICC. Mr. President, we welcome you, our honorable members of parliament, all the presenters around, and all the members in the house. My name is Leila Mutasa, and I am the Vice Team Leader, USA Chapter. And thank you all for coming around today. We really had that important message about the ICC. Personally, I feel re-energized. I hope you are all. Yes, I know we have not yet reached where we want to be, but we have made a very big progress.
Process by process. Very
big process, exactly. Progress is there, and you can see light at the end of the tunnel. We thank you so much. I would like to introduce to you our next presenter, and that's Ms. Kim Paul. She's going to talk about culture as the new currency, empowering minds, decolonizing education, and diaspora as valuable allies in upward mobility and reconciliation of Uganda. Ms. Kim Paul is a visionary leader in social transformation through art. As the chief visionary of the Artisan Conference Philosophy under the Teaching Artists Institute, she spearheads efforts to connect sustainable development with art culture in emerging economies. With a strong international presence, Kim and her team of teaching artists operate in the USA, Ghana, Liberia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and the Gambia, working on the art for social transformation, teaching artistry in action, curriculum and workbook.
United States of
Please
America,
help me welcome Ms. Kim Paul.
NUP Olomolundi August 2023. President Robert Kyagulanyi Charlie.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like that river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. I don't know what's up there on the skies. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. So I go to my brothers and my sisters, yeah, and I say, brother, help me please. But it winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, it's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes it is. Clap for yourself. You are a part of the change I think about. You are that coming. I start with music because it's important that we remember the vibration that is life, that African people wield. We are the cultural currency. When our organization, the Teaching Artists Institute, says that culture is the new currency, I'm talking about our culture. We are the rhythm people. And when we meet today in this room, we're not just talking about Uganda. At this time, I want to invite my panelists, just stand beside me. Forget the high table and the importance of sitting down. Stand beside me, stand in unity, stand in power. We have Christopher Ndot from Cote d'Ivoire. We also have Alex Nalo from Sierra Leone. Stand with me. You see, it's important that you remember that we're not talking about Uganda. We're talking about Africa for Africans, at home and abroad. from one generation to the next. I want you to remember what our predecessors were dealing with imperialism and colonization and the remnants of that. You know, when I listened to Museveni's speeches early on, he sounded a lot like Bobby Wine. But power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So when I hear somebody like Bobby Wine, an artist after my own heart, talk about the importance of people power, it is you that we're referring to. But I need you to remember your identity. Because if we get in power, and you will win, you will get in power. Nobody lives forever. You will win. The question is, when it's your turn at the mantle, what will you create? Ideation, design thinking. How are you going to make space to bring artists to decision-making tables? How are you going to decolonize education? Because taking Museveni's power is not enough if you duplicate the same systems that put him into leadership. The truth is that the Western powers benefit from the underdevelopment of Africa. I am not just talking about the work in Uganda. We are interconnected. I was in Mozambique and I saw the Portuguese language spoke so proudly. And me as a black woman, English is the only language I speak. So I'm proud to say Muganda Wangi. Right? Because I'm learning slowly. And as I convince my brothers and sisters in the diaspora that we need to go home to Africa, I need you to stand up and make sure that we're creating the Africa we want now. Because I know that you'll win. I know you will assume leadership. But if my brothers and sisters are coming back to Uganda to celebrate Catholicism, if they're coming back to Uganda to celebrate the democratic systems that were given to you, what is the rule of leadership that we've designed? How do we develop economies based on African-centered values, barter and trade? What is the Baganda's kingdom? Where are the plans? How can we empower the chieftaincy? What is it that we're going to do to decide the cultural value of Uganda? Because you are in leadership, it's bigger than Bobby Wine. He is the beginning of a movement across the continent, and the young people are looking to you for leadership. They're looking to you for leadership, and we have an identity crisis. We are trying to decide who we are. Black skin, white mask. The question becomes, what is the cultural relevance of Uganda for the next generation? And how will that influence Africans everywhere? Culture is the new currency. And us in the diaspora, we are in support of you. We want to be a part of your movement. When we show up to your shores, we want to know, are you going to give us citizenship? Are you going to welcome us as valuable assets to the redevelopment of Africa? We are artists and creators, all of us. And at the next generation, we're talking about reconciliation. Because after Museveni is gone, we'll be left with our broken societies if we don't use art as a tool to figure out the healing now. How are we going to heal after this? I'm here because I'm on the winning team. You will win. But what next? What next? Black people all over the world are suffering from an internal sickness. It grows inside of us. How are we going to heal from that? I'm here as an artist giving you what we have. I heard the speaker before me say that it was the civility of the enslaved African that perpetuated the enslavement of African people and U.S. soil. Let me tell you, we never stopped fighting. We fought until we were free. There were slave insurrections, but we are the rhythm people. Our songs were our source of disagreement. The Negro spirituals maintained our sanity. Hip-hop, this is the 50th year of hip-hop. We used our music to speak back to this system. How is Uganda's artist class going to come to the front of this movement and use their paintbrushes? How are they going to use their dances, their music? This is your power, the power to create and define reality. So I look forward to having our artists in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Tanzania. We work in these countries on the ground. We'll be in Uganda next July having this conversation. He said, are you ready to have this conversation on Ugandan soil? Guess what? Your African brothers and sisters in the diaspora already have a date on the calendar. We'll be there next July 2024 to have this conversation. We are not afraid. It's not about fear. We liberated our people here and we'll help to do it there. But guess what? We understand what comes with that liberation. Our people will be broken at the end of this fight when the Europeans and the ICC look and say, I told you so. Look at what the Africans are doing again. Look at the abuse. Look at the torture camps. We're the ones that will be left to pick up the broken pieces. And so I beg of you now, do not allow emotion to cloud how you work with our young people and babies. They are broken. They are afraid. And they're looking to you for leadership. Use art. Sing them mamas a lullaby. Mamas, we need you to come to the front. I'm talking now to the women. You are the first creator. In your womb, you will find the tenets of all creation, black woman. You are an artist. Your uterus is the first creation. I need you to sing a lullaby to the young people. I need you to remind them of their identities. I need you to help them heal through the process that we're dealing with and prepare them for what's next. I'm joined by brothers and sisters from Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone because they are also using their art as a tool to heal their societies.
Thank you very much. People power. People power. I call myself a comrade because we all belong to the same struggle. Imagine for a second, we have a sudden death of Mussolini. It's not by our revolution, it's not by our violence. Today, we are witnessing the sudden death of Mussolini. He's dead, right? Okay. Now, the big question is, can Uganda rise? We're here today because we believe in liberation. We're here because we believe that culture is a new currency. The fight we have is not about Mussolini, it's not about dictatorship. It's about the spirit of Mussolini. And that spirit has become the African spirit in all African nations. It's about corruption, it's about self. It's about neglecting our people, it's about dividing ourselves. It's about using our resources meant for the greater good for ourselves and for oppressing our people. That is the spirit we need to fight. And we cannot fight that spirit, but we need to replace that spirit with what I call the new African liberation movement. Culture is a new currency. What do we believe in? Who are we? What are our values? What are our principles? The culture of Museveni goes beyond his 37-year rule in Uganda. He became president when I was 4 years old. Amazing, right? Crazy. But every story you hear in Uganda with a 37-year-old dictator, you can get that same story in Sierra Leone, and we don't have anyone who has been president for even 15 years. And it goes beyond dictatorship. We're fighting the culture. That's the culture of Museveni. His influence on the continent, his principles, his values have been a seed of bad leadership on our continent. We need to rise as Africans, and we need to replace that culture with the Bobi Wine culture. That's a culture of hope. It is not about Bobi Wine as a person, but it's about the culture of standing up. It's about the culture of saying that I have to give it up all to fight for what is right. It's about the culture that I have to stand for what is right when no one is watching. It's about a culture of unity. It's about a culture of believing in Uganda, believing in an African. It's about a culture of hope. It's about a culture of ensuring that Ugandans can live in Uganda and fulfill their potentials. That is the culture we need. We say culture is a new currency. So we are not fighting, we are not here to say we are fighting Mussolini, that we want to fight him with the guns. But yes, if he came by the guns. He came the fought by the guns. But let me tell you this. In our generation, our gun is different. We are living in the AI generation. Culture is a currency. Our culture is our bullet, is our weapon. We are going to use to liberate our nation, Uganda. I call it our nation because I'm an African. And I believe that every African share the Ugandan story. We said culture is a new currency. And that is what we need to be, that is what we need to do. We are using this culture not only to fight and defeat Museveni, but we want to use this culture to buy him out. We want to use this culture to defeat him. We want to use this culture to bring down the long stance of dictatorship, because we believe that it has affected our continent a lot. Again, we ask, what are we using? It's about the emotions. For 37 years, don't we have brave, intelligent, and strong men from Uganda? For 37 years, we've had people in different forms and shapes coming like Bobi Wine, right? For 37 years. But this is it. It's a marathon and not a sprint. We need to endure. And we need to often tell ourselves that if we have to take the spirit, it starts with self. We need a personal approach to ensure that we win, and we need a personal approach. Our leader, our president, Bobi Wine, is seated here today because he took a personal journey. So you want to ask yourself for a moment, why are you part of the National Unity Platform? Are you part of this platform because you want to follow Bobi Wine? Are you part of this platform because you only believe in his leadership? What is a pain to you? Are you part of this platform because you think that enough should be enough? Are you part of this platform to say, even if I wake up tomorrow and Bobi Wine says that I'm no longer going to lead this movement, we are going to continue with this fight? It should be personal. That is the spirit we need. Because the more we have that individual spirit and we come together as a collective, that is how we win. Culture is a new currency. It's powerful. What stories are we telling our kids? What are we teaching them? What art are we using to build our communities? How are we using this art to ensure that we come together as a community? How do we develop ourselves? Do we care about ourselves? Do we love ourselves? A house divided cannot stand. How united are we in our unity of the National Unity Platform? How united are we? Are we interested in getting out Museveni because we want to be the next generation of corrupt African leaders? Is that our intent? We have to keep asking ourselves now and then. But we need to be intentional. And we need to be resolute. We need to be radical in our approaches to ensuring that we build a generation of people who are fearless. But not only people who are fearless, but people who are determined to win. People who are determined to succeed. And with culture as a currency, we can and we will buy out Museveni. Thank you.
Tugenda kudda